Hello, creatures! Welcome to Bound by Words. My name is Madie. I am a fantasy writer and freelance editor, and today we are talking about 3 ways you can move from short stories to novels. Now, before we begin, I have a little disclaimer. You don't have to start with short stories. I'm not one of those people who's like, it's short stories and then novels. I think that there are a lot of amazing things that you can learn and practice and experience through writing short stories, so I do recommend writing them for several different reasons, one of which being if you are just getting into writing and you want to know if it's something you're interested in, something you like long term, something you want to take more seriously. I also recommend writing short stories to novelists who, one, either need to step away from their project, or two, really need to focus on getting better at something, like showing versus telling. It's a lot easier to edit and work and hyper-focus whenever you have a smaller piece of work in front of you. But if you are a novelist and you're excited about writing novels, then just jump right in there and start writing novels. I definitely support that. Back in January, I made a video on 3 reasons why I think writing short stories helps you improve as a writer. I will link that above if you're interested in watching it. But in the comments, Hammer and Pinion asked me to do a video on how to move from short stories to novels. So this one is solely for you. And I have 3 tips, so I'm just going to jump right into the first one, is to really pick a character, a voice, or a world that you enjoy writing in, that's fun for you. Writing should be fun, and if you want to write novels, there are going to be times where you're really going to have to put a lot into it, even when you're not in the mood. But first and foremost, you should enjoy writing, and if you're going to get more serious and get into it, you should ride that enjoyment high as long as you can. But we look at these novels and we see that they're all in the same world. Like, a novel all exists in the same world, and they're usually following one person's voice or even just a couple people's voice. So the first step is to practice nailing voice. Practice writing in one world. Write as many short stories as you can in one situation. Whether it's following one character or in one world, I definitely recommend going for one character because you want to be able to write in a protagonist point of view. But if that is too boring or too daunting or too big of a step at first, then just stick to the in the same world. So create your own fantasy world. If you're doing contemporary, pick your location on the map, write a bunch of stories in that world, and then try to move into, this is my one character, this is their voice, this is their attitude. Write short stories in that character's voice, and they don't have to have anything to do with each other. They can be in different worlds, they can be in different situations, meeting different people, having different objectives, but the purpose of this exercise and doing this is to get really comfortable in writing in one person's mind, one person's point of view, so that as you move closer to writing in a novel, you're already comfortable with that. That's like a foundational skill for, I think, writing longer stories in general. Whether it's a dual point of view book or a multi-point of view book, you still have to be really strong in each person's voice or they mesh together. So if you are stuck in the short story mentality and you want to be writing novels, start writing these short stories in the same person's point of view or following the same character so that you can get really used to what that character's like and you can learn some nuances in relationships and behaviors and just get things down like habitually. Now, the second thing I think is the most difficult. So the first thing is really the most important, and this part is the most difficult, and I'm gonna call it serial writing or like serial chapters. Think in your mind as I'm talking about this like Wattpad chapters. So writing so that your short stories follow each other in a series. Like, imagine you're publishing a short story in a magazine and all of your short stories have to be in the same world, they have to add up. Like episodes of your favorite TV show or something. So wherever one short story ends, you want to pick up the next short story where that one left off. And the purpose of this is to get you used to writing longer spans in that one character's mind. Writers do everything differently. There is no right or wrong way to do this, but some people consider like each chapter to be a short story. Some people try to do like a plot point or a grouping of scenes and have that be a short story. It doesn't matter what the execution processes that works for you. What matters is that it works. So I always recommend serial writing because you start to learn things that work for you and you start to just get into the habit of writing longer pieces. Now, there are some Wattpad stories that are literally hundreds and hundreds of chapters long, and that's way longer than any book in the world. That is a lot of chapters and that's a lot of information, but the writers are just so used to putting out that serial content, picking up where the story left off and continuing. So practice doing that until you absolutely exhaust ideas is for the story or the world. So if you have your one protagonist and you're following that one person and you're really practicing that, then you move into serial writing and you do 10 chapters. Then you're like, I have absolutely nothing else for that story. You know what? You made it 10 chapters, and that's 10 chapters closer to a novel than you were with a regular short story. There is no set number that you have to like get to before you move on. It's what you feel comfortable with. You can pick up your favorite book and see how many chapters are in that book, or you can just keep doing this for practice until you feel comfortable moving on. So the key here is to get really comfortable with writing scenes and sections that end in one place that the reader wants to keep reading, and they move on to something that is a continuation. And this is a good practice for tension and suspense. So you want to tell stories that makes the reader go, I would definitely read another story about this, but then you also want each of your individual stories to have something going on that is interesting or productive or moving the story forward. Don't worry about plot right now. Don't worry about building up to the best climax. Don't even stress about the writing quality, which I feel like might be bad advice. Don't worry about those things though. Work on building the habit. The things like writing quality and story quality and going back in and getting better can always happen after the fact. Like, if this is something that's super daunting, you don't want to make it even more stressful by putting all of this extra pressure on yourself to do it perfect the first time. Books go through so many rounds of edits, and if you are doing this for your own betterment, then all you should be focused on is, am I getting closer to my goal, which is writing novel-length work instead of writing short story length work. So just focus on achieving that goal first, and then go back in and go over quality later. Step number 3 is a big jump, and that's just to rip off the band-aid and start looking at story structure. And if you're writing good short stories, and this is something you're really passionate about and you've been doing this for a while, then you're probably really familiar with story structure already. Even if you didn't do a lot of research, I feel like there's something kind of natural about telling a good story, building up to something really exciting or really funny or really satisfying happening, and then having a resolution and being done. So look into types of story structure and story format and planning that work for you. Even if you're not a plotter, just go ahead and look into it, learn something, watch YouTube videos, read blog posts, whatever you want to do, and then start to group your short stories together regarding a plot. So in the last step, I said to totally ignore all of the logistics of writing and to just work on writing serial chapters. But in this step, I want you to focus on plot. And I'm not saying do all the planning, and I'm not saying do all the editing. I'm not even saying plot out a whole book. But stop and think about how you can make one plot span multiple short stories. So if you have maybe a plot that spans 4 short stories, that might actually qualify for a novella, to be honest. So the more you can work short stories into a plot, kind of the closer you get to a novel. And I feel like sometimes it's more complicated than that, but other times it's relatively simple. Plot points can just be looked at as one short story after another, and subplots can be looked at as short stories that span multiple plots. Honestly, it's just sort of how you're thinking about it, really. So if you're stuck in the writing short stories and I'm good at it, like, use that to your advantage to say, you know, like, all I need to do to write a novel is to write this many short stories that are stuck together, and then just count them down one at a time. And you know, at the end of that stage, you can always get beta reader feedback. You can always get feedback from a friend to see the parts that went well and the parts that didn't go well. You can always practice that until you're really comfortable and you're really good at the novella length. Like Fable, one of the most popular books right now, is like such a small book. I almost want to call it a novella, but I'm pretty sure it's considered a novel. But it's such a tiny book, and it's like one of the most talked about books right now. Your book does not have to be 100,000 words. It doesn't have to be 80,000 words. It can be however long it takes to tell your story and to tell it well. So don't focus on the, oh my gosh, I have to write 400 words. I have to have this many characters. They have to be diverse. Just focus on telling a story well. And then I have a bonus step. I feel like I always have like a bonus tip or something, because as I'm talking, I just think of things that I'm like, this would also be helpful. But you know, whenever you get to that stage where you're writing novellas or you're writing longer stories made up of a bunch of short stories, that's whenever I would actually go through and I would start really pushing to do a novel. Just rip off the band-aid. And that might seem like a really big step, but if you're writing stories that span multiple short story length works and you're writing things that are basically considered novellas, then you should just rip off the band-aid and write a novel. And I know not everyone is a plotter. I'm definitely not. I feel like I do my best writing as like a discovery writer or a pantser, but I have noticed whenever I'm really scatterbrained about an idea, or if I don't like how it's going, or even if it just goes poorly, if I step back and plan, it really helps me just get my thoughts together to get on the right track to continue. So even if you are a discovery writer or a pantser, maybe you need to plan your first few novels, 1 or 2, just until you get it under your belt and you understand what you're doing, and then you can do it with ease. I like to think of it like how in middle school and like late grade school we're required to do those like 5-point essay outlines where it's like, okay, what's the theme sentence or the theme statement for your essay in your introductory paragraph, and then like your first body is about what, say it in a whole sentence, your second body is about what, you have like the 3 body paragraphs, and then you have to sum up your conclusion with what all of your ideas were. We used to have to do packets of those when I was in school, but you never had to write the essay. You just had to practice the planning so that you knew what went into it, so that whenever you were writing essays, your mind was already working like that. So if you're still struggling and you're still scared to make that jump, consider learning how to be a plotter for the sake of knowing how to do it, if that makes sense. One of the reasons that this helps me is because if I'm ever stuck, if I ever feel like my story doesn't have enough tension, I sort of know in the back of my head where readers are going to expect it to go, and you can use that to your benefit. Like if you want to meet readers' expectations in this section of your story, then you can follow that. If you want to throw them off the edge of their seat and have them totally like stressed out about what's happening, you can go against the expectations if you're familiar with these story patterns that are really common. So with that, if you got any value from this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, and please consider subscribing. I post writing related videos twice a week.